Hello and welcome to the Reading Corner with Mr. Wills, where today we're going to be finishing Chapter 10, War and the Missing Pieces. I think you'll agree that yesterday, Chapter 10, was maybe the best chapter we've read so far. It was fantastic, really great. Now you may have noticed some things different about the Reading Corner today. I'm wearing my posh shirt. I've decided to take you through an array of my loudest, brightest shirts as we're all in lockdown because I don't get to get dressed up anymore, so I'm going to get dressed up for you. And also, I'm now shooting in front of my bookcase where every day one aspect will change from the bookcase, okay? So see if you can notice something that's changed today. Put it in the comments below if you notice what's changed. So, without further ado, let's carry on with Chapter 10. I want you all to write down just one question for him on a piece of paper. Mrs. Khan walked around the room and gave us all a thin slip of blank paper. And when you're done, Miss Hemsey is going to pick out 3 questions we can ask him. You have a few minutes to think of your questions and to write it down in your best handwriting. Now, make sure you get all your spellings right and remember, it's just one question. The entire class fell quiet and everyone grabbed their pencils, put their heads down and wrote out their questions. I had lots of questions that I wanted to ask, but I picked the one that was most new and wrote that one out. After a few minutes, Mrs. Khan said that our time was up and Miss Hemsey collected all the bits of paper. Everyone began to whisper to one another and Mrs. Khan and Miss Hemsey looked through the questions and either shook their heads or nodded. "What did you ask?" whispered Tom, turning around. "I asked why he didn't stay in Greece, because the weather there's much warmer and it's got seaside places too," whispered Josie. "Oh, I asked how fast he had to run to get away from the bombs," whispered Tom. "Michael, what did you ask?" whispered Josie, leaning forward and poking Michael in the shoulder. "I asked if it was scary to be in the boat all that time at night," said Michael. "That's 2 questions," said Josie, shaking her head. Then she looked at me. "What about you? What did you ask?" "I asked what happened to his cat and his sister. Also, what was his sister's name?" "Oh," said Tom, "but that's 2 questions as well." "Right, everyone," said Mrs. Khan, clapping her hands so that we all stopped whispering and looked to the front of the class. "We've had some excellent questions here, but we've chosen 3. I'm going to say them in English and then Miss Hemsey is going to translate them both and then Ahmet is going to answer them for us. Right, the first question. What did your mum and dad do in Syria? Miss Hemsey spoke to Ahmet in Kurdish and he said something back. Miss Hemsey nodded and then looking at us said, "Ahmet's father was a teacher and his mother wrote for a newspaper." Everyone in class nodded and we waited for Mrs. Khan to read out the next question. I crossed my fingers extra tight in the hopes that it would be mine. "The next question is, what did you like doing most before the war happened?" We waited for Miss Hemsey to tell Ahmet what the question was and we all waited for his reply. "He liked to play football with his friends," answered Miss Hemsey, "and going to the park with his grandfather and eating kebby." She smiled at Ahmed, and before any of us could ask what a kibbeh is, she explained, "A kibbeh is a very special snack which is filled with mincemeat in the middle and covered with delicious spices. It's very famous from Syria and it looks like..." Miss Hemsey went over to the blackboard and quickly drew a shape. It looked like a small American football. "Is that right, Ahmed?" she asked. Ahmed nodded. We all looked at each other and tried to imagine what an American football with mincemeat inside tasted like. As Mrs. Khan held up the last slip of paper, I decided to cross my toes and my fingers. But it didn't work, because she said, "The last question is, do you still sleep in a tent or do you sleep in a house now?" When Ahmet heard the question from Miss Hemsey, he shook his head and said something. "No, he sleeps in a house now," said Miss Hemsey, "and he's happy because there is a toilet and hot water and food." We all nodded to each other. Mrs. Khan put her arm around Ahmet and said, "Let's give Ahmet another round of applause, shall we?" This time nearly everyone clapped much louder than before, and Michael even cried out, "Woohoo!" As Ahmet and Miss Hemsey went to sit down, I saw Brendan the bully mouthing "boo" and making faces to all his silly friends, and Liam gave him a double thumbs down too. I looked back at Mrs. Khan and Miss Hemsey, hoping that they'd seen it as well, but they were too busy with Ahmet. Right, now everyone, before we leave today, I want you all to listen very, very carefully. Mrs. Khan clapped her hands once again, and we waited for everyone to settle back down. As I said, you have had some fantastic questions for Ahmet, and I'm very proud of what you've thought up, and they're so interesting. But, and here she looked at us with both eyebrows raised, which meant she was being extra serious and would be extra angry if we didn't listen. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that running away from war and leaving your home is a very hard thing to do. And it's especially hard when you have to try and put all the missing pieces of your life back together in a place that's new and strange to you. Then Mrs. Khan quickly glanced at me and Josie and Tom and Michael and said, I know that some of you miss Ahmet when he's not allowed to go out and play. And I know you all have lots of questions for him. But it's very important that he talks to people who know what he's been through and who can help him feel better. And it is even more important that they can ask him the kinds of questions you all want to ask him in a safe and secluded space first, before he's ready to speak to other people. Is that okay? Josie looked over at me, and I looked over at her, and Tom, and Michael. They all looked over their shoulders at us. So that was what seclusion was for. It was so that Ahmet could talk to people. So, continued Mrs. Khan, I want you all to promise to me that you won't ask Ahmet any more questions about the war, or about his family, or without asking me or Miss Hemsey first. Is that understood? Yes, Mrs. Khan, said the whole class as the bell rang for home time. Good. Now, row one, put your things away and off you go. Make sure you have everything before you need. Make sure you get your homework and assignments for the half-term holidays. And I'll see you all in a week's time. As we waited for our row to be called out, I looked over my shoulder at Ahmet and wondered what pieces he was still missing before he could put his whole life back together. It was like a jigsaw, I thought. I hate doing jigsaws, even the easy ones, because I always get bored halfway through, and I couldn't imagine trying to do one that had missing pieces. I sure hoped that when he was running away from all those bullies and bombs, Ahmet hadn't lost any of the important pieces on the way. And that, if he had, someone was helping him find new ones that were exactly the right shape and colour that he needs. What a great chapter. I'm sure you'll all agree. See if you can answer any of the questions that were in here below in the comments section, and thank you for watching the Reading Corner. Goodbye.